Welcome to Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet with Ryan Poterack from Poterack Capital Advisory. You have unique values, objectives, fears, life experiences, and biases. Any financial professional who ignores or minimizes the importance of your story may not be able to help you achieve your ideal outcomes or hit your goals. It's time to experience the PCA difference. In this podcast, we help business executives, soon-to-be retirees, and solutions-based individuals overcome the anxiety leading up to their upcoming years. We do this by initiating in-depth discussions about the financial aspects of retirement, like tax planning and asset allocation, alongside, and often overlooked, personal and lifestyle aspects. Join us for this journey where we explore retirement from a contrarian point of view, as Ryan draws from years of experience and qualified guest professionals to help you explore the true purpose of your money in retirement and the impact you want to make in your golden years. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group and Poterack Capital Advisory are separate entities. This information is not intended to be a substitute for individualized legal or tax advice. Please consult your legal or tax advisor regarding your specific situation.
It can be bittersweet. Someone you cared about has died, but they left you a chunk of money. So what do you do now? Wealth manager Ryan Poterack is joined in this episode by certified financial planner Alec Quaid to discuss some key points that could impact your inheritance. Ryan, in your experience, how do people react when they do come into some money?
Hello, Patrice. Well, it certainly can vary. I'll start with, was it expected or not expected? But even if, let's say, it was from the person inheriting the money was coming from their parents, so it was expected, it is not unusual at all that the amount is not known and it may be far off. I've even seen situations where with a married couple, older generation, where the husband passed away and the spouse had no idea their level of wealth. But particularly between parents and kids, talking about the parents' wealth is not a common conversation. So the amount can be a surprise. But regardless of who you are or the source of the money, it is a windfall, typically psychologically, because there was no effort on their part to earn the money. So that it tends to be spent or used very differently than the money or resources they already own from their hard work.
Well, it's a give me. It's free money.
Yeah, sort of. Yep. Yep.
Alec?
Well, I'm curious, actually, question for Ryan. In your 3 decades of doing this, Ryan, how
careful
often
now, careful. I'm a young man.
I'm prefacing because you've had lots of experience and seen many cases. I mean, how often have you actually seen, let's say the inheritor is your client, them having those conversations with parents prior to passing away about potential inheritances? It can't be often, right?
It's extremely rare. And even with our clients, we go, I think we put a lot of effort into communicating to clients and communicating to their kids who might, if they are clients of ours, and seeking to facilitate that conversation is just not a conversation that anybody is typically comfortable with. And so it's never in the top 5, maybe not the top 10 on their to-do list.
Right.
But yet the lack of the conversation can cause so many unintended consequences, problems, taxes, lots of other issues.
And I think the taxes are the thing that most people would think of first. Well, maybe second. Maybe first is like, oh my, what am I going to do? But second is definitely, how much do I owe?
Yeah, for most people, which might have no application to any individual listener in our audience, taxes really are not an issue. They're perceived to be an issue, but for example, with many people have heard of estate taxes and how much will the government take? Well, right now under current law, you have to have well north of 12 million. If you had your last surviving parent pass away, their estate would have to be worth well more than 12 million. That's a number I know right off the top of my head before there would be any estate tax. Also, if the parent owned stocks in certain investments, there's typically not going to be taxes associated with inheriting those. Now, if you inherit traditional IRAs, that's pre-tax money. Maybe it's you inherit a 401k, traditional 401k pre-tax accounts. It is true that those monies are still subject to income tax when the money is pulled out of those accounts, but the person simply dying, and then you, if you're the inheritor or the heir inheriting those accounts, that's not a taxable event in and of itself. So I get many more concerns and questions about taxes than literal tax problems created by inheriting money.
What about an annuity? Is that different?
Doesn't have to be in effect. If you have now an annuity like a mutual fund, a bond is just a financial instrument. It would depend if, for example, if the annuity is a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA, then the rules of traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs will supersede the fact that they chose to put the money in that particular financial vehicle. But let's say it was after-tax money put into an annuity. They put $100,000 in, it grew to 150,000, then they passed away. The heir inherits the $100,000 in principal along with $50,000 of deferred interest inside the annuity. That $50,000 of deferred interest is still going to be subject to income tax. Now, it may be in the final estate tax return of the parent in this example, or they may be able to continue it on, they being the heir, to continue on the tax deferral, but it doesn't evade ultimately paying taxes on interest. Because one of the advantages of using, or one of the potential advantages of using an annuity with after-tax money is you don't pay taxes on the interest as it's accumulating, but that can be a strategy that serves the parent while they're alive and now they've passed away. And typically the heirs want to get their hands on and control of as much money as they can so that they can deploy that money for their own objectives, pay off a house, pay for college education of the kids, or just simply take a longer vacation. So they might not be as concerned about, okay, here's a $150,000 account I just inherited. Yes, I have to pay income taxes on the 50,000, but that still leaves a pretty big chunk that I didn't have last week.
Alec, how about something like just a liquid asset? What have you seen there?
Yeah, and just going back for 1 second, Patrice, just further clarity,
Sure.
I think our listeners should be aware of that $12 million number Ryan threw out as the estate tax exemption. If you're married, it's double that, 24 million. So that's a big number that we don't see. Majority of folks would be under that threshold. Now, also to be aware that estate exemption number might be coming down in a few years with the
True.
expiration of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, 2026, I believe. That number, and we don't know for sure what that number is, but what they basically said is it's going to revert to the old number, whatever it was before 12 million. It was like a couple million. I don't know if you remember off the top of your head, Ryan. They're going to adjust that for inflation, and that's going to be the new estate tax exemption number. So, of course, Congress could step in and keep it where it's at. But if it were to come down to, I don't know, let's say half, and all of a sudden it's 5 million, 6 million, just hypothetically, now a lot more people are subject to estate tax issues, and that'll become a much more pressing and important planning item that certainly we at PCA will be discussing with our clients. But Patrice, when it comes to the liquid assets, and I think Ryan hit on this when he said, a lot of times there wouldn't be tax associated with that. That's because of, for example, if we're talking about security, that's because of what's called step up in basis. And step up in basis, how that works quite simply is when
use their house, for example. It would apply to other investments, but their house is a real simple example and typically a person's biggest asset.
Yeah. So on the day of death of the deceased, the value of that asset, in this case a house, resets to the value on the day of death. So therefore, if the inheritor were to sell this house, there is likely a minimal or no gain in this asset because the value reset to the value on the day of death. So the capital gain, if any, would be the value on the day of death to the day of sale that the inheritor, executed the sale. So very often there's no or minimal tax. It works the same way with securities in a non-taxable brokerage account.
Well, and compared to, let's say that in the 60s, the parents bought a home in California for 100 grand, and now it's worth 2.5 million. Well, if they sell it prior to death, that is the cost basis is 100,000, what you paid for it. There's $2.4 million in profit. That some of that's going to be subject to taxes, but once they die, the $100,000 cost basis, as Alec alludes to, becomes exactly the value of the house, or 2.5 million. So if they sell it 6 months later, and let's say it's grown to 2.6 million, it's cost basis at date of death 2.5 million. Now it's 2.6 million. Sales price $100,000 is subject to income tax. So the increase in cost basis is a huge deal. And it applies to a lot of different assets.
All right. I small story here. My mother benefited from that step up in basis. When my dad died, she got the house. They'd been in that house for 60 years. And she would have been clobbered by capital gains. But because of the step up in basis, when she sold it a year and a half later, she was not hit that badly.
Yeah. And Patrice, this is something that we'll proactively talk about with our clients as an intentionally plan not to sell an asset, a house, a stock, whatever, and decide we're not going to sell it to completely avoid a capital gain. Our inheritors receive that, pay no tax on it. And instead of spending down, this asset, we're going to spend down from over here instead.
Mhm.
So it's a proactive conversation we'll have, and we'll be on the same page with the client, in a case that it makes sense.
Ryan, you've seen a lot of people inherit money, I'm sure. How does grief impact the way they receive the money and they deal with the money?
Boy, it's so individualized. I mean, we all know people who are more emotional and less emotional. Also, even, and I guess I sort to the most common situation is where the parents have passed away. And when the first parent passes away, typically there's no inheritance. It's really when the second parent passes away. And so how prepared are the kids for that? Was it sudden? Sometimes that can be a shock to the system. But also the process of actually taking receipt of the value of the various assets can be quite a process, because if there hasn't been a conversation between the parents and the kids prior to the parents passing away, the kids don't know where all the accounts are. They don't know the passwords to all the websites. There's a house to put on the market. There might be cars to sell, or boats. And so there's a process that converts everything to cash. And then you throw into the mix some tangible items that might have some sentimental value. And let's say that there's more than one child. Let's say there's 2 or 3. They may have very differing views on what they would prefer to get from the inheritance, even though all the documents say equal. Well, it's really easy, Patrice, to split up cash. But if you have certain tangible items, like, okay, one of the cars was a 1966 Ford Mustang flash, I don't know, whatever, and one of the kids just really wants that vehicle. Well, what's the vehicle worth in order to give appropriate and equal worth to the other 2 kids? It's easy when you sell. What something's worth is what it'll sell for. But you get into situations where there's certain tangible objects or assets that one of the kids really has an attachment to: a gun collection, a coin collection, a stamp collection. So there's a lot of things that go into it. And I think from the wealth manager or financial advisor side is being able to just, if they're willing to facilitate the conversation and the discussion objectively, because I've seen more family situations negatively disrupted than positively enhanced in my career, for sure.
That's a shame.
It is a shame. The antidote to that, almost without exception, is if there's open communication before that event happens, and good and clear documentation.
Right.
If there's a gun collection that goes for goes to Steve, then that is made very apparent in the estate planning documents. It's not gray. Anything that is not specific falls default to gray. If you're splitting your estate equally amongst your kids, again, it's easy to split dollars and cents. It's not easy to split the value of a gun collection equally.
Do you ever get pushback from the executor?
Well, I hesitate because I'm not sure what the pushback would be. The executor has the responsibility of following the terms of a will accurately. And so I'm more dealing in the behavioral finance and the, dealing with the emotion and how to possibly reach an equal splitting of the estate strategically. But the executor's hands are, they're really tied by what the will says. They don't have discretion to a great degree. That's, they have the responsibility of carrying out the terms of the will, but they don't have any more right to the assets addressed in the will than the other heirs. Now, yeah, I get pushback all the time. I guess maybe I just don't look at it as pushback. I look at it as a difference in viewpoint, and I'm just there to help. So I give them my point of view objectively. But in the end, I never forget whose assets they are. They're certainly not Ryan Poterack's. It depends when you're providing advice or counsel, there's two sides to that. And there has to be another party who is willing to consider the advice and counsel and engage with curiosity, seeking their own best outcomes and communicating what those are to me. Because, I'm certainly not going to waste my time trying to win any kind of an argument at all in the end.
Alec, any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think having a relationship with a wealth manager or financial planner prior to your windfall, your inheritance, is extremely beneficial, because if you build a trusted relationship beforehand, you can know that, hopefully the advice given is, sound, objective, specific to your situation. And I think, Patrice, when you mentioned, when someone's grieving, just inheriting money from a loved one, making fast decisions sometimes feels like what you have to do. You have to get this done. You have to get that done. But a lot of times I think slowing down can be really helpful, and even not making any major decisions right off the bat. Maybe it's a month, maybe it's 2 months, maybe it's 3, whatever it is, can be a good idea, because a lot of those decisions early on can be very emotionally charged and maybe not always your best well thought out decision, because of just the emotions and the grief and things of that nature. So that's something where, Ryan and I could really help. And I think a lot of our value in that situation is helping people step back and see the big picture, because you're not often able to see the big picture when you're, in an emotional state. So I think that could be a huge value.
Well, as closely as we work with our clients, and as holistically as we work with our clients, we know a lot about, let's say, the parents. I would suggest that I know more about my clients than their kids do in terms of their objectives and how much of how they see the world. It's different. I'm not saying that what I know is more or better, but they are typically areas that the parents have not shared with the kids and the kids have not sought to explore. And let's say the parents are in their 80s, and based on their particular objectives, biases, and at that time, they're my client. So I'm setting up strategies and charitable giving or tax strategies or investment strategies aligned with them. And then all of a sudden, the parents pass away, and I might be talking to 3 kids who we don't yet have a relationship, that might be in their 50s, totally different objectives. They have spouses. Some of those kids, some of their spouses think they know a heck of a lot more than they really know. And all of a sudden they're, well, why did you do this? And why did you do that? Said, well, I was working with your parents. I mean, you kind of get a sense of where I'm going with that is all of a sudden, the investments and strategies that I had for their 85-year-old parents were never supposed to meet their objectives. But sometimes they come at it as, these strategies are not ideal. Well, yeah, they might not be ideal for a couple in their mid 50s. So it's a delicate balance. I tell you, sometimes because we never know what we're going to get unless we already have a relationship with the kids. We really don't know what to expect. We don't know what their experience is with our industry. It could be good, bad, or indifferent, different levels amongst kids and financial success. So it's interesting. It's interesting.
Sounds almost like the Wild West.
We don't know what to expect. Yes, around the corner.
Well, with that in mind, have you seen children use some of the inheritance as a legacy to their parents?
Oh, I have. Yes. 100%.
How so?
Absolutely. Well, and just in terms of, I would say most prominently is just being good stewards of the money. And the language that they use. Typically, it is an heir that has their own financial success. And also, I would suggest that the apple doesn't far from the tree. Generally speaking, successful parents have successful kids. Not always. I'm sure there's a lot of exceptions in our audience. But if they already have their own success and they had a close, loving relationship with their parents, those are two ingredients that lead towards the respect for the amount that was inherited and spending that in a way that their parents looking down from heaven, if that's your belief or using that as an example, would respect and support. And that can be charitable, that can be responsibly providing for their children, which are the parents' grandchildren. I mean, it can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, but it really is about mindset and attitude. In that situation.
Alec, your thoughts?
Well said. I wouldn't add anything.
That's because I'm so old. I got all that experience.
I was going to say
57 years young, Patrice. That's very young.
He said 3 decades. We'll leave it there.
Oh, boy.
Guys, that was a great discussion. Is there something we didn't touch on, though, that you really think we should, in that it will make people think carefully about the value of what they've inherited?
I just always beat the drum. Find a way to get to a healthy conversation. If your parents are still alive and you have reason to believe that whether they have substantial assets or not, I mean, there's still a lot of things to tidy up. And the more that discussion happens before the situation is relevant, the easier it's going to be for everybody. There's just so much to settle, even if there's not significant assets to inherit it. So it's easy for everybody to agree when I talk about that. And then it's very rare that action is taken. So that would just be one more plug for that, for taking action.
And I just add, Patrice, that, we don't have time in this podcast to hit on all the nuances of, how different accounts are inherited, like non-qualified versus IRAs versus annuities, but there's a lot there. And there's a lot that's even changed in the past couple of years with different laws that have been passed on how some of these accounts are inherited and the rules surrounding that. A coordinated plan around that is what we do for our clients and how we provide a ton of value. So I would just add that's super important to work with somebody who's up to date on the rules and nuances, regulations around those types of accounts.
All right, then. Well, how can listeners reach you?
Teresa, you can always get us on, touch base with us at our website, www.poterack.net, Poterack.net. We're out there on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Anna Hopkins is kind of directs traffic on incoming communication, but we'd love to get acquainted with anybody in our audience that would like to.
All right, then, listeners, it's never wrong to ask a question. And this podcast, Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet, may have some of your answers. So please follow or subscribe and, of course, share with others. I'm Patrice Sikora. And thanks for being with us.
Thank you for listening to Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. To ask questions about topics covered during the show, or get a copy of Making It Count, Life Isn't Lived on a Spreadsheet by Ryan Poterack, visit www.poterack.net or give us a call at 704-366-5776. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Poterack Capital Advisory. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Poterack Capital Advisory does not offer legal or tax advice. Please consult the appropriate professional regarding your individual circumstances. Nothing contained herein is to be considered a solicitation, research material, an investment recommendation, or advice of any kind. The information contained herein may contain information that is subject to change without notice. Any investments or strategies referenced herein do not take into account the investment objectives, financial situation, or particular needs of any specific person.
Product sustainability must be independently determined for each individual investor. Poterack Capital Advisory explicitly disclaims any responsibility for product suitability or suitability determinations related to individual investors.